With the presidential race in full swing and candidates taking swings at one another, especially on the GOP side, it has a different feel this year, or has it always been this rough and tumble? Well, that's one of the questions I posed to a true Washington legend, a guy who has frankly seen it all. I'm talking about former Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell. A short time ago, I spoke with a Maine Democrat about politics and also his latest honor, being chosen as Grand Marshal of the upcoming St. Patrick's Day Parade in New York. You know, if I told you in the late 90s that 15 to 20 years later, when you're in the middle of trying to hammer out a peace agreement in Northern Ireland, that you'd be the Grand Marshal of the St. Patty's Day Parade, you probably would have checked what was in my coffee, right?
I think that's right. At least that, maybe more.
Well, think back to it. Before, the Good Friday Agreement was even a distinct hope here. I know what you were getting to. Are you pleasantly surprised it's held this long and been this firm and nobody wants to go back to the way it was?
Yes, I am pleased. There are a few people on the fringes of both sides who still are not reconciled to not getting 100% of what they wanted. But I think it's fair to say that the overwhelming majority of the people of Northern Ireland and of the Republic of Ireland don't want to go back to the days of the past, the bitter sectarian conflict that so dominated and held back that society. And while they have differences, disagreements, problems, as does every society, including our own United States, they're resolving them not with bullets and bombs, but with debate, discussion, votes, elections, which is the way the democratic process should work.
Well, speaking of the democratic process, you've seen a lot, and I gave our audience a brief synopsis of, I think, one of the most interesting careers of anybody I've ever spoken to. Is the process working right now? Can you ever remember, and we're less than a week from Iowa, a more convoluted, unexplainable appetite for some of the most bizarre things I've ever heard of? Can you think back to a time that you can remember where there's been this amount of not just anger, but venom in many cases that seemingly is finding a pretty broad audience?
It has occurred in our history, but not in recent years, and certainly not in our lifetimes. If you go back to the elections of Franklin Roosevelt in 1932, to the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, to some earlier elections, there were critical moments, a deeply divided country. I also think, Richard, that this is a product of several factors. The first is that when economic times are tough, and they have been tough in recent years, people are more open and susceptible to appeals to anger and division and fear. Secondly, the pace of change, not only in our country but in the world, is truly dramatic. The technological and communications revolution through which we're passing, I believe, will be seen by future historians as significant as was the Industrial Revolution, and that transformed the arc of human history. We haven't figured out a way to make up for the losses of jobs in what I call middle class, middle income, working men's jobs. And so while we benefit from technology, we're not able to come to grips with the downsides of it. Combine that with globalization, there's been a dramatic, indeed a spectacular increase in trade and advances in television. We didn't have cable news networks even 10 or 20 years ago. So all of these have come to a head, and I think there are other factors playing on it. There is within a segment of the Republican Party a very strong, deep hostility to President Obama. I saw in a recent poll that 2/3 of Republicans think he's a Muslim, over half think he's not an American, and I think that hostility is finding some expression in this election process. So the country's divided. I think the general election is going to be very close no matter who's nominated. And the primary campaigns are hard fought. But I think we'll get through it because the United States is, in the end, large, strong, diverse, and ultimately optimistic and prepared to move forward.
Well, you mentioned before, both as an arc of history, when there are tough economic times, the newest Americans get the harshest glare, and moreover, you also talked about certain elements where they look to certain elements of the population with a distrustful eye. People may not know this, but you are a product of immigrants. Your mother, a Lebanese immigrant, your father, an orphan of Irish immigrants. When you see what's said now, both about the Syrians and where they should end up or not end up, also what we're going to do, putting up a wall theoretically and rounding up all the Mexicans that are here or anyone else for that matter illegally, what's your reaction also through the prism of history?
The United States is unique among nations in many respects. We truly are an exceptional society. And one reason for that is that throughout history, most nations were organized along lines of common ethnic, common religious, common ties that created a homogeneous society. The United States is different, except at the very outset, we've had an open policy on immigration for the first nearly 150 years of our history. We've received people from all over the world. What is common about Americans is not their religion, not their ethnic heritage, not their native language or color. It is their commitment to the ideals of individual liberty, government of, by, and for the people, an independent judiciary, and opportunity for everyone. Now, throughout our history, that's encountered problems, especially when economic times are tough. People tend to see outsiders as a threat. My father's parents immigrated from Ireland, and they encountered, as did many in that era, signs that said Irish need not apply. Some of the political cartoons of the time were brutally harsh about Irish. Italians went through it, Jews went through it, Chinese, Japanese, Indians. We even passed a law called the China Exclusion Act. You can't get any more specific and racist than that. So it's not new that people fear new groups, especially in tough times. It's not new that there is a difficult time of assimilation. But the greatness of America is that we have always overcome that, and people coming in have made enormous contributions. Let me give you just two examples. Two of the largest companies in the world today are Apple and Amazon. Steve Jobs' father was born in Syria. Jeff Bezos' adopted parents were from Cuba. Would we be a better country if they couldn't get in and Steve Jobs had been raised in Syria and Jeff Bezos some way had been raised outside the country? The answer obviously is not. I don't think Steve Jobs would have invented Apple growing up in Syria, and I don't think Jeff Bezos would have created Amazon if he were in Cuba. So we have to realize there's a balance. We can't take in everybody who wants to come here. Those days are long gone. There are too many people who want to come. So we do have to have limitations, reasonable restrictions, but we also have to recognize that we benefit from the influx of people who make contributions to our society.
Coming up next, more with George Mitchell, including his tenure in the U.S. Senate and why he turned down a Supreme Court nomination once a long time ago. Also, we'll talk about that historic peace deal in Ireland that he helped broker.